government corruption, state-sponsored media, rampant immigration, unaffordable living costs, the attack upon the energy sector, manufactured food shortages, the woke. The problems facing our country seem at times overwhelming. For those of us in the older generations, we're also left wondering how our country, a nation founded on freedom and respect for people's rights, could have fallen so far. But people are pushing back. Victories in our courts are being won, not as often as we would like, and not always for the reasons we would like, but victories nonetheless. People are sharing the truth both online and in person, despite censorship. And more Canadians are showing that they've had enough of the lies, the coercions, and the leftist narratives. Some are running for office in an attempt to rebalance the political scales. And others have started new political parties, feeling that the existing conservative parties have fallen too far from the values they were elected to uphold to be saved. I've interviewed a number of founders and leaders of new conservative parties, from Maxime Bernier to Pastor Art Pawlowski, current political leaders, to past Canadian conservative politicians such as Preston and Brian Peckford. All are well-intentioned and truly believe that government exists to serve the people. But none have given as much thought to the problems facing our country as my guests today. Luke, Denis and Chris Hampton are the founders of the United Freedom Party of Alberta. They are also the authors of the book, The Freedom Handbook, published in 2017. It's been said that 90% of any solution is understanding the problem. What Luke and Chris propose would be to many an extreme form of libertarianism. Absolute minimum government and maximum personal rights and responsibilities. A system in which governments are limited to defense and administration and nothing else. Critics would say that a society can't function with such a low level of government oversight. But Luke and Chris provide very sound, thoughtful arguments to support their idea that not only can such a society survive, but that it would thrive and become a model that others would follow. As long as the people in that society accept that freedom is a responsibility, that we cannot truly have one without accepting the other. Luke, Chris, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming in today and talking about the United Freedom Party. Now, obviously, before we get into anything too deep, we should tell people, well, what is the UFP? What is the United Freedom Party? What is your platform? And why did you start yet another political party? And because there are now several independent parties in Alberta. Why would you start this? What's your platform?
You want to start?
Well, I was thinking you might enjoy taking that one, Luke.
Well, I had a business when I was 30. And, when you own a business and you have employees, you're dealing with the government. And, the things that they do, you just put your head down, you're trying to make money. But over the last 5-8 years, and more importantly, what's going on right now, is the world, our country is on the verge of collapse. Anybody who thinks otherwise is delusional. And the United Freedom Party came to, when it does collapse, is some psycho going to, promise a bunch of nonsense and take over again? Or are people going to say, we want something different? And so that was the real purpose of the United Freedom Party, because Chris has always said, well, nobody's ever voted in freedom. It had to, So then my thoughts were, if it does collapse, then maybe people will see what we publicly stated, how a government could run with freedom in mind. People always point to the United States as being that freedom long ago. But if anybody thinks the United States is operating under freedom today, they're just living in a fantasy. And so a serious change has to come. Most people don't even consider or think, none of our politicians today are talking about the contracts that none of us know about with the Crown Corporation and many others. Why are we paying money to the Crown, right? And so these things all affect us. And if we don't get rid of the underlying issues, we'll never be what anybody would call freedom. But freedom is responsibility, and it's scary to most people. The average person is scared to death of it because it is personal. There is no safety net. There is no social security. There is no health care paid for. Now, people find that scary to the point of depression or fear, that it means that nothing's going to work and I'm going to be broke. Well, what people don't understand is if our healthcare system was based on freedom, as an example, it wouldn't cost very much. It would cost next to nothing. Being diagnosed with cancer wouldn't be a life-threatening condition. It'd be no more serious than getting a tooth pulled. The evidence is out there. Anybody wants to do research. So, but the government as is has to change, or we won't have a better life while we're here on this earth. So the United Freedom Party decided to put freedom at the foremost, publicly put it on the web and register with Alberta. And it could apply to anyone. You asked me earlier, like, does this just apply to Alberta? No, anywhere anyone wants to be free. Our group of people want to be free. But those people, the majority, have to be told what to do because they'll go along with any nonsense that's promised them. That's not the people we're talking to. We're talking to people with jobs, people with families, people with businesses who want a better future.
So how do you define freedom, gentlemen? Because, there's people who think it means, well, you should be able to do anything you want. That's not freedom. That's anarchy. Obviously, there do have to be controls. There are some things that just about all decent people will agree should not be allowed. You can't put child porn or snuff films up on social media, for example. What is your definition of freedom?
Well, that's a big question. Oversimply, I think that freedom is the right, of course, as an individual to govern your own decisions, lest they cause harm. That golden rule is the crux of it. And you don't need, endless rules which just keep compounding into, endless books and streams that you can never catch up on. We don't need that. You don't even need to write a rule down, as we stated in the legal chapter, the Freedom Handbook, which we wrote, near 10 years ago before the Freedom Party, which was designed to wake up everybody from your grandmother, you might not know, and also be a great read for freedom fighters like Luke and I and yourself. I think freedom boils down to, again, that right to choose for yourself, lest, of course, your decisions cause harm. And everybody knows what that looks like. And the minute that you write a rule down, when I say that we don't need written rules, that sounds, even scarier than no health care or pension. But think about it. The minute we write a rule down, there's always going to be an exception to that rule. And it always requires the same things that we have now. There's no government in the world that ever dumped poison in a river or built a road. That's men and women that do that. It takes a human being. So, if we're asking ourselves what freedom is, I think it's the right as a human being and an individual, again, to make your own decisions unless they cause harm. And if that's the case, if there's a man or a woman in the community or the community itself stands up and says, these actions are causing harm to property or body somewhere, then that's a natural case for the court. And it should be governed by the same precedents and so on that have built our societies, which I think we can trust that we're going to do. So from policing to building the roads to protecting against, fascism and the corporatocracy getting out of control or whatever have you, whatever end of that freedom equation you want to challenge, I think we can give people the right to make their own decisions and to govern themselves and rely firmly on that base understanding that governs the free world right now, as far as we understand it, which is, do as you will, but if you cause legitimate harm to another human being or the environment, we're going to have a chat about that, and you're going to be liable. And the nice part about real freedom is that everybody's liable. So from the secretary to the CEO in a corporation, right now whistleblowers are persecuted and have been forever. But we could very easily turn the tables on all the corruption and that whole chicken and the egg, even that great documentary, The Corporation, when speaking about these kind of slippery slope people are very concerned about when talking about instantiating a greater sense of freedom. The reality is that if everybody from the secretary to the CEO knew that they were liable, obviously in varying degrees and whatnot, but for any harm that got caused while their tenure at that organization, if that was the case, then boy, oh boy, does that situation change quickly. And everyone in the institution has a vested interest, not only to protect themselves from any liability, but to protect the world that we share in a much more true and honest sense. When we see anything nefarious or untoward going on, speak up. Let's get to the root of that and let's solve those problems.
Right. I want to get more into potential policy changes and accountability in a bit, but I want to ask one more question about freedom. Because, of course, in the last few years, as we all know, our rights and freedoms, especially our constitutional charter rights, have been violated by our governments, not just the federal government. Jason Kenney's provincial government did it too. And so the question that I would ask is, do either of you believe that there is ever a point where a government has a right to violate our charter rights?
Yeah. When you cause egregious harm to someone else, but
let me explain the question, because there's nothing in the charter that gives you the right to cause egregious harm to someone else. We're talking about things like security of the person. And by the way, I asked the sole surviving author of the charter, Brian Peckford, about that. And I asked him, does that mean the government can't take away your right to make a living? Does that mean the government can't tell you that you have to be injected with something against your will? He said, absolutely, that's what that means. And of course, there's a number of other charter rights in there as well. And these are supposed to be the highest law of our land. But our governments have been arguing that in the current circumstances, they have a right to violate that. And so what I want to know from both of you, United Freedom Party founders, is there ever a situation that you can imagine in your minds where government should be justified in violating our charter rights?
I was only referring to after you've been convicted of a crime.
Okay.
So you forfeit your right to many things.
Yes.
Freedom and such. But when you're talking about, you're referring to what has happened where they have taken away all those rights under the guise of public protection. And whatever justification they came up with, we now know, looking back, was false, was misleading, was outright lies. That's not even up for debate. But to your point, no, absolutely not. You're right. If you're not causing harm to others and someone else proposing that your existence is causing harm to others because of some invisible virus, that's lunacy. And if you allow that, then what's the next crazy lunatic idea that's going to come? And, I think the stage is being set for the next worldwide illusion that's coming. Because if anybody thinks there was something that was killing people, there's no evidence of that. People die. You can look up the stats, deaths every year. We don't live forever. This is a standard fact. And I think it was well over 89% of everyone who died was over 80. These are facts. And I'm sorry, this is what happens on this life, and this should be no surprise to anyone. And going back to your point, if you allow the government the right under any circumstances to say you have to stay home, you can't run a business, here's a loan that you're going to be subjected to pay back, to try to live. But how many people took that loan and couldn't pay it back now? So who now have to pay, I think it's 5% interest. That's just one example. What about the people who lost their business and the people who lost their jobs? Does that help? The government in their reaction worldwide and in Canada especially was egregious and it caused more harm than anyone could know. They were saying that it would take 5 years for the surgeries to catch up with the amount of delay that's gone on. So, and then the suicides. I mean, you look at the suicide rate in Canada, it's gone through the roof. Young children, white males is the highest suicide rate group. And what's the government doing about it? Nothing. They go to the World Economic Forum and talk about more nonsense, telling us we're going to be net zero. There's no such thing as net zero. That doesn't exist. Anyone with 5 seconds of thought would realize that this is just a fantasy of nonsense. And the fact that people buy into it and go and protest, people will believe anything. It's self-evident by what's going on. And I'll say one more thing. CO2 is not a pollutant. We're breathing out CO2. We're breathing in CO2. Anyone who's run a greenhouse knows that once you've maximized the food for the plant and the light for the plant, the only way to increase production is to pump CO2. CO2 is a natural process of our earth. Carbon is not a pollutant. calling those things pollutant and anybody going along with it is a moron. I've had it with idiots and stupidity. And the government gets to go along with this nonsense that causes you, I mean, look at the price of food. Have you ever in your life, like we're both old gentlemen.
Yep.
We've never seen anything like this. And it's getting worse. And then the government, I don't know, a lot of people might not know this, we just gave Ukraine another pile of money. And they, of course, the media doesn't say anything about it. We are suffering. There's more people using food banks right now in all of Canada.
Yes.
It's the highest it's ever been, and it's getting worse. 84% of Canadians are $380 away from bankruptcy.
Yes.
That is outrageous, and we call ourselves free, and there's no limit to what this current government has in implementing more harm on us. So, no, the government should not be there to tell you what to do. It should only be there to protect you if you need them, to protect your rights. That's it. And it all goes back to common law. And I'll just round this off this way. Anyone who's been into small claims court knows what common law is. That's what common law is. If you've been in a small claim court, the rules are vastly different than when you go into court of Queen's Bench. That's a house of nonsense. That's where there is no common law there. You know, if you're speeding down the road, they can give you an arbitrary number. And that's a violation. And I don't care what anybody thinks. I was just watching a video in the 80s when they were implementing the drinking and driving laws, and people, just average people in the street, were outraged. I would encourage us to find that clip, and maybe you could post it. It's short, but people were saying, "Oh, well, I can't have a couple beers after work? How outrageous!" And they were just literally freaking out. But here we are today. Our rights, it's easy to erode rights and erode them until the Charter of Rights, as Jordan Peterson just said a few days ago, worthless piece of paper.
Well, yes. And if I may on that point, I think, the quick answer is no. The government never has a right to infringe on your individual sovereignty, period. Again, the government is there to protect us and organize us as a nation in a very, very minute sense. We, are advocates of the smallest government that the world has ever seen. Freedom's natural next steps forwards. And again, these ideas aren't even ours. We've stolen them back through time for 1,000 years or so or more. And there's a lot of people around the world who would agree. But, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. That's the reality. Look at what the WHO is doing now, trying to steal the sovereignty from the nations. If we're going to go back and try and stand tall and firm on our, Canadian Charter, on the American Constitution, again, which is subverted back, a long, long time ago. Eventually, when you go into court against the government, as they stand right now in the Western world, trying to fight for freedom or anything, you're going to lose at the end of the day, by and large. We might have a small win here, a small win there. This, again, like Luke said, I don't think we're voting in our freedom. I mean, why did we start a political party when we don't believe you can vote in freedom? That's an interesting question. But I think Luke pointed to the reason at the beginning. I think people need to understand that there's another option. And maybe not when their back is completely against the wall with a knife at their throat. Maybe there's a chance that we could take some steps beforehand. And if they want to bring order out of ultimate chaos in an even uglier way, then as Luke said, maybe there's enough of us around the planet that can understand that there's only one story ever being told in human history. It's ritual, it's uncharted, and it's called New Borders, New Possibilities. And that's the reality. We, again, 200 years ago or so or more, we've got this last American experiment in freedom. What a great thing that was. How many countries in the world have taken on, that charge and instantiated things like freedom of speech or right to bear arms? Just to pick the two favorites, right? There's a lot that we already understand, having lived in this American experiment for freedom for so long, where it went wrong, how it gets subverted, how we can avoid that in future. What's government's role? Very little. What can they change in terms of the rules and the law of the land? Nothing. Their role is diplomacy and defense, as far as I'm concerned, and nothing outside of that. If there's anything in the world that the government does better than the free market, put your hand up, send us a note, And I think John Stossel will still pay you a long-standing 15-year bet on that one, because there's nothing the government does well. It just is, it exacerbates all problems. And if you think they're not here to beat the crap out of you, you've got another thing coming. And like Luke said, you can't fix stupid. But, our message is for shepherds, because the world is full of sheep. I think the Bible uses this language with real purpose. There are a lot of sheep in the world, and there are a lot of shepherds, and we all play varying roles at different times. We might be a shepherd on one issue and a bit more sheepish in another. That's fine. But, the only way to forge a new road, and that's what we're talking about, because if we wait for things to be handed to, we can't vote in freedom. Tucker Carlson's not our savior, nor is Douglas Murray across the pond. All these fantastic people spouting good ideas, I'd venture to say most of it's controlled opposition. And if the real humans on the planet want to stand up and make freedom, freedom is on the march, that's for sure. But if we're going to take it somewhere, take a stand and make it last and make it right, then we're going to have to stand up as shepherds and start offering our hands to these sheep around us and say, hey, look, there's a better way. Watch. Let's do this. Doesn't that look better? Doesn't that feel better? Because when you got freedom in your heart, what's freedom? It's unstoppable.
Chris, earlier you made reference to holding these politicians accountable. And as we've discussed, they have been violating our rights. And I could go on a long diatribe about the various methods that they use to keep themselves out of trouble, to be able to dodge responsibility for the things that they do, the harms they cause to the people. United Freedom Party, how would you change that? How would you put a system in place that would hold the elected politicians accountable?
It's a favorite one. You want to take that one?
In the late 1800s, right around the turn of the century in England, you couldn't bribe an official because they had no power. When you rolled into port with a ship and you unloaded your cargo, there was nothing they could do. There was no customs. The only way to stop corruption is to not give them any power. There's no other way. The Constitution of the United States is nothing but limiting powers to the government. What has it done? It has been violated at every turn. I mean, we even wrote in the book, George Washington took 5,000 men and went in the rum wars and killed a bunch of people because they didn't want to pay the rum tax. Does that sound like freedom? No, because he had the power to do it. And if you give somebody the power to do something, they're going to enforce that power. If somebody doesn't want to pay a tax, there's nothing you can do. You shouldn't be able to do anything. And we impose on the United Freedom Party a 3% tax. Blanket, that's it. And if you pull resources, lumber, timber, or natural resources out of the ground, 3% goes into a fund that we all get a check, like they do in Alaska, because those are natural resources and we should share it. But there's no corporate tax. There's no payroll tax. There's no property tax. There's no governing authority for healthcare. Now that scares people, but let me finish. When they voted, a lot of people don't know this, when they voted for freedom of religion in the United States, it passed by one vote. That's how close the United States, when its founding, came to being some religious caliphate of some kind. That's a lot of people don't know that. Guess what the next vote was? Freedom of medicine. And it failed by one vote. If anyone thinks having Health Canada keeps you healthy, look at the people who work at Health Canada. Do they look like healthy people?
Yes, it brings to mind a number of public health officers in this country, yes.
Yes.
The bottom line is, if you're 120 years old talking to me about health, I'm all ears. These people in these places, with the FDA, the CDA, World Health Organization, they're all garbage. There are health methods that cure everything. They're available. They have always been available, but you will never hear about them if the government's paying for it, because the government is inept. It'll hire some institution like Health Canada that gets its mandates from who? Pharmaceutical companies. This isn't a conspiracy theory. And anytime a group of people get together, it turns into a conspiracy. Now, some are benign, like your local knitting club. That's a conspiracy, but it's benign because everybody has their own self-interest. But when you give somebody like the FDA the absolute authority to decide this or that, you're going to get corruption like you've never seen. Yes. And we don't have a healthcare system. You get the treatment they're allowed to give you. And I'm going to give you one example. We talk about it in the book. You can look it up on YouTube. Dr. Brzezinski. He's been curing brain tumor cancer, the most severe kind, for over 30 years now. And the FDA sued him and tried to throw him in prison for the rest of his life. But he won because they couldn't get one patient to say one bad thing about him. Not only is he helping people, his treatment has no negative side effects whatsoever. So when the system is giving up on you and you got brain tumor, which is, people don't realize is a 100% death rate. They'd go see him and he's at 34%. He might be higher now. But if you ask an average doctor about him, oh no, that guy has no proof or evidence, because this is what the system has done. They're not interested in cures.
So how do we hold them accountable?
So the thing is they don't have anything. They don't have the power to do anything. The United Freedom Party, and we might even change this, you get a $60,000 a year salary, no pension, no allowance. That in and of itself is going to bring service-minded people to the table, not corrupt people. Because we pay over $180,000 right now, plus pension, to people who get into politics. What's the average mean income in Canada? Dual income, I think it's 50?
It's somewhere around there. Well, 50 and 60 for a household.
For a household.
Yes.
So why should you elect some guy who says whatever and pay him 4 times more than the average person makes? That corrupts you right there. Now you feel, I mean, you know how it is. You give somebody money, they feel self-important. Plus you give them the accolades, and it goes on and on and on. The rules that we propose they're written on stone. That's it. They can't be changed. So after we put the Freedom Party in, you're an administrator and you don't need to vote anymore. What are you voting for? To change the good? Is the United States better off what they were doing before 1930, before 1913, before the Federal Reserve was put in place? Were they better off? Were they prosperous when they were following the Constitution? Nobody would disagree that they're better off than they are today. When you promise somebody something on the expense of someone else, it doesn't mean you don't care about somebody, but it's a road to hell. And you bankrupt the country. Our healthcare system started in the 60s, and people will fight to the death for this mediocre care. It's mediocre. There's no cures. Do you want cures or do you want this? And this is collapsing. So you have a choice to make. Let people be free. You'll live longer. You'll live happier. Think about everybody who has a job right now in Alberta. If we instituted what we're talking about, all you pay is a 3% tax when you buy something. That's a 34 to 39% increase in everyone's income who has a job. Now you might say, well, what about the people who are dependent upon the system? Well, think about it. If you have a grandmother in a care home that you can't afford to take care of at this moment, but you got 40% of your income back and so did your siblings, could you take care of grandma? Your life would increase to the point where you could take care of your family. Who's going to take care of your family members better than you? Society isn't a collective to take the whims of everybody. No minimum wage. No unemployment insurance mandatory. If you're a worker and you're worried about being injured and you couldn't work, there's private insurance out there. And it would cost next to nothing. So, living in that world, would it be better? That's all. Anyone watching this could just imagine. Would this world be better? Would you be safe? Yes, the police are still there. But a man or a woman has to file a complaint. The police can't run around looking for problems unless they see something happen. And it used to be that if a man and a woman were in a domestic situation and the police showed up and she refused to charge him, they had to leave. Now people said, wow, that's, for whatever reason, now the police, the minute you allow the police or the state to start charging you, you're doomed. You're doomed.
So I think we can agree there's no such thing as a perfect system. But if I'm understanding correctly, what you're proposing is that, if I'm correct in what you are proposing, I think many of my viewers would agree with you, that what we need to do is to take our government from being this decision-making dictatorial power-mad group of, I don't even know what to call them, and basically just turn them into administrators. That there's a certain amount of things that, yes, we do need a government, even a federal government to do, but keep it to the bare minimum, pay them a reasonable wage. No, there's no pension or anything after that. There's no honeypot for you. So that begs the question, though, who does make the decisions and how?
Well, that's why we wrote them down, and those are the things. Because anything that comes up in between is going to be an issue between a man or a woman. That harm can be settled in the court. I'll give you one that'll probably blow your mind. In the United Freedom Party, there's no family court. None. If a man or a woman decide to get divorced, nobody told them who or how to get married, right? So why should some court sit around and decide what they do with their assets? It's all by contract. If a man or a woman live in a house, if it's in their names, neither party can make them sell the house. If they sell the house, she's entitled or he's entitled to half, right? Those are civil agreements. What about the children? If there's harm being done, that's a criminal matter. You go to court. If somebody's caused harm, they're going to get charged, they're going to get dealt with, right? But why should an independent court, family court, it's a joke, be telling which kid should be going where? The minute there's no government protection over your decisions in your family, women aren't stupid and men aren't stupid in general. They will make the best decisions. They will be careful about who they get in arrangements with. And they will be more courteous to each other because there's no salvation coming that's going to divvy up everything and you walk away with whatever. Because a strong family is the only thing that's going to hold any nation together. And if anybody thinks otherwise, they're delusional. Because the state can't protect you. We've had family court laws for how long? Do you think society is in a good place? Not a chance. People have to be accountable for their decisions, and they have to live with their decisions.
So when we talk about accountability, the price of freedom being responsibility, and responsibility has an innate piece of sacrifice in there, I believe. You're always sacrificing as you take on more responsibility, a little something.
Allow me to give you perhaps a lead into this, something I've been saying to people for a long time, and I think it will resonate with both of you. A liberal is someone who believes society is responsible for the individual. The conservative is someone who believes the individual is responsible for society.
Yes. I agree wholeheartedly. And, obviously you can't ever subvert the rights of the individual for the betterment of the greater good. I mean, that's just a slippery slope to the nonsense that we're in. And again, when it comes to accountability, whether we're talking on the corporate side or the political side, we're just replacing politics and the political class with leadership and community. We used to I lived in a small town in Europe, and we owned a lot of our own problems. When somebody was misbehaving, we might dump them, pick them up and put them in the fountain. And if they really continued, we might walk them right out of town. If they continued again, then we'd say, you're not welcome back in our town. And there's lots of ways that, the community all the way through time, whether it's homelessness, whether it's education, whether it's, the disabled, it doesn't matter what your cause of the moment is. If you feel so compelled in your heart to help in some way, so be it. But don't force your hand on me. It's not my responsibility to pay for the education of the children of this nation if I don't have any and I don't want to. If my children are grown, for example, then I'm done with that. I might decide to contribute to education if it's important to me, if I value that, or senior care, something else, right? Whatever it is that moves us as individuals and as a community. Women for most of human history led the charge there, whether it was bake sales, getting together again in their clubs, raising money, raising awareness, and providing services for the community. And once we started outsourcing those problems to the government to solve, again, they're just exacerbating the problems, raping and pillaging. It's going nowhere fast.
All right, so let me give you a specific instance of what I was getting at earlier about who makes the decisions. Because earlier, Chris, you talked about the government only having two roles, defense and administration.
Yes.
Right. But I'm going to add one to that because, and I think specifically, we could look at this in provincial government, look at this in federal government, there has to be a certain amount of infrastructure that goes outside the purview of a particular jurisdiction. So, for example, let's say you've got, here's an example. Let's say you've got a town, is 100 miles from a major city, and the road between the town and the city is degraded to the point where it needs to be repaved. Who makes the decision that needs to be done?
Well, I think initially, ultimately, again, the community, the individuals, the human beings, the men, the women, they're going to be the ones that are going to identify a need. So whether it's a road or whether it's a community program, whatever it is that they need. And as we're suggesting, the private market is always going to be the go-to for a solution, generally speaking. Are there going to be some who knows? That's an interesting question on the larger side. I think ultimately you can still find a private solution for that. You're going to find somebody who's going to be able to put that road together, pay for it in an economical fashion, the voting and so on. The administrators in the government can help to corral these needs together, can help to corral some options. And unlike these days where there's always private agendas and people lining their pockets and governments are paying 2 or 3 or 4 times the market rate for regular goings on. I mean, if you hired a contractor for a bathroom renovation, and every year he came back to just ask you for more money and more money and more money and these problems, you'd go bankrupt first of all. You'd never hire that contractor. But that's the way the government solves all of our problems, and it's what their answer is to all of the things that go on or just give us some more money. Well, look, education reforms have been going on around the planet for decades and decades and decades, and it's just getting worse. So I don't think we can have overarching government solutions and bodies that solve real pragmatic problems. No, men and women know how to run the world, build the world, engineer, innovate, create, do, and dig a hole. They're going to continue to do that. We're going to be able to find a private solution between that town and that city with respect to the contractors and the organization, and any voting or, money share they can combine. There's obviously interest on both sides of the equation. It's like both sides of the pond, for example. You get into trade and stuff like that. Do we need a government to start managing trade? No, I think we need, you have the court systems to protect against any harm. So if there's any legitimate harm going on, then, that's another story. If that contractor's taking advantage, if the work isn't done up to snuff, so be it. They're fired. We have another one come in. It's a lot easier to maintain.
We also have transparency in the government.
That's right.
The 3% that comes in, any citizen of the country can log in and see how much they took in real time and what these things cost. And it's all subcontracted out to private contractors. There's no government employee. There's no city employees. There's private companies that take care of the roads. So what would happen between that town and the city is, when that problem's identified, is a private contractor would say, this is what it's going to cost. And the government has that fund of 3% for no other purpose than any out of jurisdiction public works. Like you said, it could be running through a forest and there's no local area, so it has to be maintained by the government, right? In this particular instance. But that's what that 3% is for. That's it. Maybe there's a public works for a dam, maybe. I don't know if Alberta is even geologically suited to that. That may not be an issue, but we won't tell people what to do with their property. And there's going to be no permits required. None. You want to put a nuclear power plant up? Go ahead. You want to build a refinery? Go ahead. 3% of that goes into the fund for the nation. And nobody could spend that money outside of those contracted allowances. So for instance, if the people said, hey, we'd like a high-speed rail, and that was going to not be a private thing and was going to be paid for by the government, the administrator has no ability to say yes or no. Anything that affects us who live in this new world, in this new country, has to be voted on.
That's easy online. We have those tools now.
So there's no instance where this is going to turn into a hard life. With the luxuries we have today, with the technologies we have today, and the energy. Energy is the lifeblood of any nation. What do you think the cost of our energy would be in the world that we're proposing?
You're asking the wrong person. I know the answer.
It would be, you wouldn't, there's a game. It was a stupid little game where you imposed the tax and you were the government. You imposed the rules in this little sim game. And it was years ago. We watched it. It was 15 minutes long, but the guy just went total anarchy. Lowest tax he could. He didn't regulate a thing. And the stupid city had glass towers and high-speed rails and swimming pools. Like, the guy goes, this is ridiculous. And then his tax, because his tax was the lowest, I think it was 3%, he had more money than he knew what to do with in any other simulation that he manipulated. The prosperity that a nation operates. For instance, if there's no corporate tax, where would Apple and Google be headquartered? Where would they run their servers? Where would they hire people? What would our communities look like when a developer didn't have to give away anything to anybody except 3%? What could he build? Right? I mean, our imaginations can't even understand. If you unleash, as we wrote in the book, Chris was the poet for this, unleashing human potential has no limits. It would be as close to paradise on earth as you could get.
And of course, for the viewers who are wondering, well, how the heck are you going to run a country or a province or anything on 3%? Remember, what you guys are proposing is we get rid of this gigantic elephant of a government that is where most of the money that we pay in taxes is going to feed them. If we don't have that, if all we have are some basic administrators, well, you don't need much money, do you?
No, and I think you would be surprised at how much money that would turn into. And if, heaven forbid, there was an emergency where it wasn't enough, like in the United States, they had no tax. World War I came along. They had to convince the people to give the money for the cause that they believed in.
And there's a story behind that one, just in case you don't know it, Luke. Yes. The Income Tax Act and the Fractional Reserve Banking Act were passed within 6 weeks of each other because the banks wouldn't get on board with fractional reserve banking and give money to the government that didn't exist. If the government couldn't guarantee them, they had at least a way to pay back the interest.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so
and the Disney campaigns as well that dovetailed with that, right? As well. Yeah, we wrote about that stuff in the book.
Well, doesn't our CRA officially say it's voluntary? I believe that's what they claim.
I don't know.
I know in the United States, I have a friend who moved there, and I believe it was 1998, he received a pamphlet that says, congratulations on making this the most successful voluntary tax program in the world. Something along those lines. But I can tell you, anybody who's had to deal with that organization, it doesn't feel voluntary, does it?
It certainly does not.
We're just talking about a better world. Now, some people could say, that's fantasy, that'll never happen. But where there's an idea and there's a will, it could happen. But this is going to collapse. It should have already collapsed already. What's holding this house of cards together is beyond me. But the other problem is, it's not just the cost of this or that we can identify easily. It's all the hidden contracts, like with the Crown Corporation. The contracts you or I have never seen. And why are we paying debts that were written by people who were dead centuries ago? I just heard, I think it was 1994, one of the U.S. states paid off its Civil War debt. Things like that we have no idea. Why are we paying for things? I'm sorry, Britain, it's a failed state. You see what's going on in Britain. It's horrendous. And we ought not to be giving them a cent. This party's over. And we're going to print our own money. And I think it should be backed upon something that can't be manipulated. I like the idea of Bitcoin because it's not controlled by it.
Well, and on that note, parallel economies, right now as we speak, I believe Derek Bros is hosting the 5th Greater Reset. And Anarcho-Polko is about to kick off. Jeff, another great Canadian, Jeff Berwick puts that together, right? And there's a lot of the top freedom-minded individuals and speakers every year hustling down there, from the, libertarian sector, the, yellow and black sort of anarchist types of ideas. You talk about anarchy. Anarchy is without rulers is the real definition of that term. And it's not chaos, So anarchy as synonym for chaos is actually not the linguistic truth of that equation. However, without rulers means we rule and are responsible individually, as you spoke about key there, for ourselves. And that does not mean at the expense of the whole, because if any man or woman can stand up and say that I've been harmed by this new system or these people or whatever, then you've got a court case. And I think we can all feel fantastic knowing that, from Hillary Clinton, on down the line, there's an awful lot of evidence every day. Again, I just want to cut through the noise. You can spend a lifetime getting fascinated with all the junk that's going on and putting our fingers on whether it's the COVID or this or that, the next thing. Look, if we're going to wait for these people and their solutions, the order that they're bringing out of this chaos, when Luke says, I don't know how it's holding together. Well, I think they're holding it together with all kinds of, magic hootenanny, just so that, of course, they can pull the rug out at the moment when they deem it most, beneficial for themselves. But, what are we talking about here? We're talking about responsibility. We're talking about accountability. How do we hold down? I don't know if we're going to get a chance. I think, if I was one of these criminal people and I saw a new board, a new possibility creeping up, another instantiation of freedom, I got a question for us. Why does the world feel that it's such a crazy idea to form a new country? a new house. Everybody's got a right to their own house. And as I say, from the people that are gathering right now in Latin America to, the people living in Latin America, living in Europe, living here in the Americas, anywhere on the planet, there are millions upon millions upon millions of people that would agree with us. And if we would move and vote with our feet and our wallets and our hands and our hearts and everything we've got to support one another, we could pick a few different houses. Maybe Alberta is the best place in Canada, and that's why we're starting here. But as we say, the United Freedom Party's message, mandates, models, everything that we're talking about are universally applicable. You can pick your spot in Europe, you can pick your spot in Latin America, and let's get her done. New borders, new possibilities. We deserve a house of our own.
And the people
They can't stop us.
And the people who demand their welfare, the pension system's broke. I don't care what the government tells you, the stupid ads on TV, we're going to make it solvent for the next 70. That's just a delusion. They spent all the money when they set it up because they had no accountability and they didn't care. And they always thought somebody would, it's a Ponzi scheme. It's bankrupt. That's why they have to keep pushing. If it wasn't bankrupt, why do they keep pushing the retirement age? Because they can't afford to do it. And now they want you dead. It's called MAID.
Yes.
Anybody who thinks the government doesn't want you dead the minute they have to start paying you, that's how corrupt the system is. And it's not just them, the World Economic Forum. Bill Gates, in a TED Talk, said, this new vaccine rollout should kill 15% of the population. That man should have been murdered and ripped apart on stage. That guy is a piece of garbage. Dr. Fauci, he's not a doctor. He's a ghoul. He's a clown. He said he could get AIDS off a cereal box. That should have been the end of that man's career.
They land in Freedom Land, they're getting held accountable. But as I was saying earlier, I don't think they'd ever set foot in our house.
Well, imagine
they know the price they'd pay.
Imagine what the dentistry would be like with no regulation. All the systems that work, the cost would be minuscule. Nobody would care. Nobody would want the government to pay for it because the minute the government implemented our healthcare system, the costs are through the roof for the mediocre nonsense care we get.
Yes.
And it's never going to get less because the pharmaceutical companies run the whole thing. When you have that much money, it's inevitable that you're going to take care of your own interests. You could, it's insidious to me and you, but it's just, to them, it's just, we're here to, this is how we're going to make our profits, right?
Luke, Chris, sometimes my guests tell me that I ask hard questions. I don't usually think so, but this time I do. I think I got a very hard question for you. It's based on everything we've been talking about. Chris, you said you can't vote in freedom. Luke, early in the interview, you made reference to the fact that something that it might be an unpleasant truth, but it's a truth that you and I and most of my viewers know. Most people are sheep. They're afraid. And then we talked about a conservative is someone who believes that the individual is responsible for the society. And that's what we're discussing here. We're talking about building a society that's based upon people who believe it is their responsibility to contribute to and look after the health of that society. But here's the problem that we have. The vast majority of people are sheep. They're afraid. They're especially, and there's even a lot of people out there who would pay lip service to everything we've just talked about. But when you ask them to actually step outside their front door, to do anything that looks out for anyone beyond them and their own family, they won't do it. So here's the really hard question. How do we change our society so that we raise people who believe it is their job to look after the health of the society of which they are a part?
I got a pretty good answer for you. It's the you-all analogy. There's going to be people who will never buy into what we said and think it's going to be chaos. You can't just have a free healthcare system because what that means is anybody can do anything because you can't hold somebody accountable unless they were egregious, and that's a personal thing. There's no oversight. So if I seek treatment of some guy who's a wacko, that was my choice. And if he caused me harm, I'm not absolved of it. And neither is he. So I could have a court case. That would have to be settled there. But there's no alternative. You can't say, okay, because who determines who's the crazy person? We have to have that personal accountability. So in the end of the day, if we propose what we're talking about here in Alberta, we can't take away anybody's citizenship of what we already are, Canadian people, right? They would be entitled, because you're entitled to a pension when you live abroad. So they'd be entitled to those things they wanted to hang on to if they chose to still stay here and demand what they were already promised, as long as it was being delivered. I think it's coming to an end, but they have the legal right to it. We're not taking that away. We didn't make those promises. We're not the one fulfilling those promises. But if they really don't like it, they could just get in their vehicle, pack up their U-Haul, and go to Saskatchewan and fill your boots with all that socialistic nonsense that the government's going to promise you, that they'll never deliver on. Or if they do deliver, it'll be mediocre nonsense, because I can't please everyone. This is a house for people who want to work, be accountable, and like Chris said, how many people on the planet think that way and would want to be in a system like that, where you can choose what kind of medical treatment you want from whoever's proposing it? You want to go to the crystal lady? You want to go to the seance guy? Go ahead. But I promise you, there'll be real cures that you will have access to that will be demonstratable. Dr. Berlinski has 40 years of data, as an example. And how many more like him? How many doctors? I mean, I'm sure you've read about the doctors who had cures in the past who were just railroaded. You know, the frequency treatments, viral treatments. There's tons and tons of them. So the freedom is scary, but we're just humans. We're not proposing anything crazy. We really aren't.
I love that question. I don't think it's that hard. I mean, it feels hard. Don't get me wrong. I've spent probably the majority of my adult life working in freedom thinking about probably that one question. You know, again, when we wrote the book a long time ago, we wrote it to try to wake up everybody, because like you're alluding to, and it's an integral part of that conversation, is, you know, how are we going to wake people up? And I think, you know, like you're talking about, you know, politics is definitely downstream of culture. So we got to strengthen the individual. We got to strengthen the family. Hence, our communities are going to get better in the politics. Of course. And every generation has the same stories, says the storyteller, the same lessons that we need to be teaching. And maybe it's on us as the teachers and the storytellers above all else. However, it's a responsibility for the entire culture, every generation, to educate the young. So, you know, I mean, grabbing a hold of education back from the state, first of all, is going to be a big step in the right direction. I think already with homeschooling, unschooling, you know, we talked a lot about that in the book. I'm still a huge proponent. I love the energy and the momentum that way. You talked about your own efforts in the coming up in the next year on education with respect to rights and how important these things are. Yes, we need to educate people. Yes, we're going to be able to bring more sheep along in so doing. However, as Luke is suggesting, the buck stops here. You don't like it? Get the fuck out. I'm sorry. If you don't like it, there's 260 some odd countries built on madness. Pick your flavor. Here, we're talking sober, hard, maybe uncomfortable for some, scary as poop for others. Doesn't matter. And I'm not saying that, being dismissive. What I'm suggesting is, we cannot wait to wake up more. That is folly. What we need is generalship, clear direction from shepherds, and the sheep will follow those that are ready. There's really, you know, there's always that old adage, you know, there's only three types of people on the planet. There's the people that will never, ever agree with you, no matter what you say. There's the people who already agree with you. And then there's the people who are on the fence and maybe could use a bit of, you know, maybe they could come along. Okay, so let's talk about how we convince those two people. Yes, let's talk about how we educate those people. But let's keep our eye on the prize. As I said, I think is a strong suit for us, which is, let's remember that we don't need their bloody permission. We don't need it any more than we need the Trudeau's. What we need is the cojones to stand up, say, this is wrong. I'm gonna go left. I'm gonna go right. Who's with me? And around the planet right now, from the thing, just the people sitting down talking about it in real time today, there are just enormous amounts. And the people that would support, we need to vote with our feet and our hands. And we could double the population of Alberta. Let's be pointed. Think about that, folks. If we got 4 million people, 3 million, doesn't matter. We could 4 million new freedom-loving people in Alberta. Hello, it's our house. These are the rules. If you don't like it, get out. End of discussion.
No, I'm not paying the Queen or the Crown Corporation, which is two different entities. I'm not giving Britain any money. I'm not putting the stupid Queen or now the King. We don't need kings and queens. That crap is, everybody should hate that already. Come on. I can't believe the stupid British running around in the street when the next little dictator comes
An
out.
awful lot of Europeans love their royalty.
It's beyond stupid. I don't care. Fill your boots, like Chris said. Fill your boots. You want to go kiss the boots of that loser, Charles? He's a cock of a man. I mean, he looks like a marshmallow. The guy's a loser, and people adore that guy. What has he done? What has the royal family done for anybody to better anything? Nothing. There isn't a nation on earth that's trying to better its people, with very few exceptions. You know, like Hungary was, if a woman has 4 kids, she's tax exempt for life. I mean, that's a step in the right direction. But how many kids, like I had 2 kids, because if I was only paying 3% tax in the world we're proposing, how many kids would you have had? That's an honest question.
That's not a bad question. My wife and I agreed that we weren't going to let our children outnumber us. We only had 2. But if you told me we have 4 kids and we don't pay tax, we'd probably had 4 kids.
Yeah.
I would add more kids. Who wouldn't? How many
So
people?
what we incentivize, we get more of. So rather than incentivizing a welfare state, why don't we incentivize some good decisions? You want to talk about a government, not a mandate, but a government incentive? Well, how about we incentive some morals, some values, some education,
And
these kinds of things. Sorry.
You'll make the right decision. You would have more kids naturally. And the thing is what you could do with extra income is up to you. You could save it for your future. There's no property tax. You could build on your property. And there's no zoning laws and zoning. I don't care what people do on their property. And if somebody does something on their, my brother said, oh, what if the guy starts a hog farm next to? Hey, if it causes harm, like it's spilling onto my property, okay, that's a separate issue. But I don't care. Because the minute you start telling people what to do with their property, I live out in DeWitt. Every week I get a letter about what some neighbor's proposing to do. I literally throw them in the garbage. I don't care what anybody's doing. I don't want to care. And somebody could say, well, yeah, but in your world, somebody could start some crazy nonsense and open up an all-night outdoor, what are those? Festival, right? And okay, but that would be disturbing the peace. And we already have solutions.
And you're making a very good point, Luke. And this reminds me of something that happened to me here personally. 20 years ago, my wife and I have been in this house 25 years ago. 20 years ago, my neighbor comes to me and he says, well, I've got that big spruce tree in the backyard and I'm thinking about cutting it down. Are you okay with that? And I looked at him and says, it's your tree. What are you asking me for? So let me see if I can sum up what we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes, because I have to say, I like your answer to what I thought was a difficult question. So let me throw out my own little observation on this. 3 of us sitting here, we're all what they would call our ultra-right-wing conservatives. Who's the ultra-left-wing liberals? From my definition, it's the woke. They don't just think society owes them something. They think society owes them everything. And if we defined a liberal as someone who believes that society is responsible for the individual, okay, well, that makes the woke the ultra-left liberals. These people are parasites, absolute parasites. They contribute nothing. They walk around whining about their imaginary problems and expecting everybody else to fix it for them. So if we build the kind of society you're talking about, let's do a hypothetical mind exercise here. Alberta separates. We become our own country, our own nation. We have sovereignty. We can do whatever we want. And we implement a system like what the United Freedom Party is proposing. Here's what happens. Within 6 months, probably less than that, there are no woke people left in this province anymore because we're not giving them handouts.
That's right.
There's no welfare. There's no minimum wage, and people believe
they self-deport.
They'll self-deport. And the other thing is I'm going to. This should alleviate, because there's always this thing in good people's mind that these people on welfare are needed, and without it, they're destitute. They'll be on the streets. To alleviate that concern, I can tell you unequivocally, it's been tried. You can look it up. In the United States, food stamps, as an example. There's been a few states that said, well, let's implement a 20 hour a month to get your food stamps for the month. You have to work 20 hours during that month. That's nothing, right? In all cases, dropped by over 90%. 90% of people who are on welfare have convinced the government to give it to them, and they live underneath that means to collect it. So whenever there's something given, there'll be a class of people who will figure out a way to get it. But I'm telling you right now, 90% of people collecting a welfare check right now or a government ad right now doesn't need it.
Well, and that's the bigotry of soft expectations on the racial side, too. We can look at that. So again, whatever we fund, we're going to get more of. If you want to give away welfare, you're going to have a multi-generational welfare state that just, again, the problem exacerbates and you're just going to have a social nightmare. But what Luke is really suggesting here is humans are amazing. My dad told me very few things about the nature of life, but the most valuable lesson he ever taught me was, Chris, I don't care what you're doing every day. If you got to dig a hole, you go out and you give it your darn best. Because then when you come home, you can look in the mirror and you did all right today. And you can feel proud of yourself. Because if you can't look in the mirror and say that to yourself, you're going to start to hate yourself, son. And that's going to be a horrible life. Now, what we're talking about here is that. So even if you're telling people because they're, purple or brown or whatever it is, that, that the society's out to get them and this and that, and it creates that bigotry of soft expectations, and it's a societal problem for them that enhances their own weakness and their attitudes about themselves. Whereas on the flip side, like Luke's saying, you pull the rug out and you say, look, there's no more welfare. In 6 months, those checks stop. There's all types of opportunity. Get to work.
But the taxes end now.
Right. The taxes end.
Yeah. You got 6 months for the family. They'd figure it out. Get the U-Haul or get to work. And there's no minimum wage. The minimum wage is in cities. There's lots of countries that don't have minimum wage. If you went back 150 years and started proposing a minimum wage, you'd be stoned in the town square.
Right.
Because you're a lunatic.
Never mind tax collectors getting buried in the backyard for trying to come and collect 1%. I mean, that's human history, right? So again, you just to hammer that point home for anybody that's feeling fear in their heart, you need to understand that life is not a zero-sum game, period. Economics to love to whatever, and look in your own heart. Think about the moments in your life that you felt weak, you felt down, you lost a job, you this and that. All it takes is that, not just that get up and go attitude, maybe to pull your bootstrap sort of conservative mindset. But even if we only need a helping hand here and there, your brother says, "Oh, come on, here's a job, the minute that you get out there and start working again, feeling better, everything opens up, including your attitudes, and you could migrate from one of those horrible sheep I think, when we talk about that juxtaposition between these ideas and all of these entitled people, never mind the generational entitlement that's just sweeping across the world, that's pretty tough as well. I think that the solutions to those are very, very easy. And that's what Luke and I are talking about. They're very, very easy. Because, you can piss and moan in the wind forever and just get a mess all over yourself. But when you just stop the nonsense, let's stop talking about it. Let's talk about a solution. And let's not even, let's instantiate it. There's no more fucking checks for you, but there's 3 different opportunities to make some money. Pick one or get the hell out. And that's it. People are going to go to work. They're going to come out. They're going to feel fantastic. And a bunch of these young people that are so entitled, Luke's son, who's famous for being a man of almost the fewest words you've ever met, but he's just an amazing engineering mind and a nice guy. He's always joking about that socialist entitlement sort of attitude on that other side of the equation where the world owes you something. He says, look, the means of production that people are constantly talking about stealing and grabbing from one another, so go buy a tool from Home and Hardware. And that now you have the means of production in your basement. Go make something, says the artist. I mean, I'm just a wordsmith, for goodness sakes, but how hard is it to make something of value for the world around you? Be of service. Go to the gas station or wave the peaceful warrior type of, if you want to look at it from a new agey, I don't care what, just feel good about yourself, first of all. Go and do something, and you're going to feel even better when you do something to serve, as Bob Dylan even said. You've got to serve somebody. It's only one job in the world. And if you can't figure out how to do that for yourself, don't worry. We got a whole whack of jobs. We'll throw you in there. And if you can't do it, we'll find you one that you can. No problem.
Now, gentlemen, we've discussed a lot of things that I know would really resonate, certainly with my viewers and many Canadians. But there's a challenge. Not long ago, I interviewed David Parker, the founder of Take Back Alberta. And I approached David for an interview, largely on the basis of a statement that he made in a speech I heard him give up near Edmonton last spring. And he said, every time our governments go off the rails, we get all these new political parties forming. And very often they're well-intentioned people. Some cases, they even have really good answers to the problems, like you guys do. But he said, there's a problem. They never get elected. What's your response to that?
Well, like I said at the beginning, this might be an idea that sits on the internet till it all collapses and enough smart people go, okay, well, let's go this way instead of trying to rebuild this nonsense that collapsed. That might be the thing. Maybe we don't get elected. My ideas are what they are. The book is what it is. If you want a better life, it's not going to be... I can't think of a place on earth I want to go to where I could say freedom reigns. I can't. So we're left with, what's the alternative? Give up? So maybe enough smart people will say, hey, listen, I like what these guys wrote down and I think this is a better way to live. And maybe that's what it'll take. Hey, I'm here anyway. I'm not gone. So this is the chance we're taking.
And I think, I really like that question because it's one of the reasons why we work, again, I'm just the wordsmith, so it's part of my job to think about. I do on the corporate side some renaming, on the rebranding side, hard and fast ideas about language that really have an impact. And I think that the United Freedom Party was chosen with this issue and conundrum in mind, in large part because, as you say, there are lots of great... I really, really admire Pastor Art Pawlowski. I go to his church. It's where I met Christopher Weddick of the Mindshift Studios, as well as the Mindshift show that we were recently interviewed on. I really enjoy listening to his sermons from a Christian perspective. I really like his views politically as just a man on this earth. And I admire the work that he did. I think it's unprecedented, the amount of support. He was able to put a political party together and get representation in all the ridings to get himself into that last election in 10 days flat, which as far as I know is unheard of in Canada. So if that doesn't set a precedent for possibility, first of all, in direct answer to your question, I think there is a real possibility that we could get elected. As I said to you before, we could easily double the population of Alberta in a very few. They're talking about bringing in, just in 2024, almost 1.5 million new people. What if we did that ourselves on a proper scale, just started a call out around the planet and said, come here, I don't care what you do and what the rules are, just get your butt here. We could live in our basement. Now we're not talking about, people that are, you wouldn't want in your basement. You're talking about people you'd be happy to have, and families coming, everybody coming. And then at the end of the day, I think that we need, like Pastor Art is talking about all the time, and that's why he named his party the Solidarity Party. He said that in Poland, they failed the first time, they failed the second time. The only way they were able to kick Czechoslovakia out was this solidarity. Every group of people, like the old quote, first they came for these people, then they came. If we don't know that we need to stand up together, if we're going to win this war, then, that's number one. So I think the United Freedom Party is here to, whether it's the Maverick Party on the federal side, whether it's political movements down in the U.S., we have ways where we can join together. And that is part of the mandate of the United Freedom Party. It's not just Luke and I trying to never mind our It has nothing to do with us as individuals. These are the ideas that we're putting forward, hopefully before we're dead. But I really do believe that we could unite our efforts around this great province and around this great country and beyond, across the borders, across the world, and make real change, happen by voting it in. I believe that's possible. I do believe it's possible. But like Luke says, I think worst case scenario, even if we didn't get voted in, the problems that they're hoping to engender out of their own chaos that they're building for us would be, at least there's an alternative. So if it really comes down to a breaking point, even if the world chooses, there might be enough people on the planet who look and say, you know what? I think we're going to go this route instead. Anybody who wants to go this route, we're building a house over here. I mean, it's a free state project in New Hampshire. I don't care where. Luke and I would move. If somebody else can do this somewhere else, we'll go. It doesn't matter where. What matters is what we're doing and why.
Right. And I like both of your answers because it leads to the next natural question. Let's assume you don't get elected. But these very ideas have an influence on the thoughts of the people, the political landscape. And at least my viewers know that this war we're in, this attack we're under from the globalists, it's a long way from over. They got a lot of plans for us yet.
Well, this is 1,000 years in the making.
Right. So what would be your hope from these ideas, even if it wasn't necessarily just, the United Freedom Party itself, just these ideas, getting these ideas out there into our society? What would be your hope that people would take from that in order to be able to stand up for their rights and freedoms, to be accountable to their society, to build freedom? What changes would you like to see among the people come out of these ideas that you guys have?
Assuming that we don't build a new house.
Assuming we can't build a new house, assuming we can't change the status quo, we have to live with the kind of system we've got, but at least maybe we can change the minds of the people, at least some of them.
Well, for sure. And hopefully anybody watching this would start to think, hey, you know what, that would be a good idea. And those are the people we want to talk to. And like Chris said, the rest of the people who are on the fence, once they see it implemented, if it ever did, they would see how amazing it would be. It would be overnight. The amount of income and the amount of business that would be attracted, the amount of people like-minded around the world who would want to put. Like, people are leaving California every day to go to Texas and other places that are more free, right? So people do move and do like good ideas. But going back to a little bit before about being elected, well, we just elected a conservative government, right? What has she done? Well, let's be serious. Nothing's changed. I mean, really, is she standing up against the World Economic Forum? Is that party saying, hey, we're not allowing these gun laws that just been, no. They're not standing up to the nonsense that's going on right in real time right now. So this fluffiness that's going on is just tearing. We're just straight to hell. This is where it's going. It's collapsing. It's collapsing around your ears right now. So if you think that these ideas are scary, look at the mess you're in. Are you going to be able to retire? Like we just said, over 80% of Canadians are less than $400 away from bankruptcy. What are they hanging on to? Well, this isn't working. What future? How many kids are living in their parents' basement because they can't afford to get a house? I bought my first house. I was married at 21 for $134,000. I assumed the mortgage. My dad helped me with the $5,000. Assumed the mortgage. And it was a double car garage. I think it was a 2,500 square foot place. Beautiful 4 bedroom home. Could you imagine? If I said that to anybody listening to this right now, they think I was living in another time zone, right?
But we did.
We did it.
I probably bought my house at the same time you did.
Yeah.
This humble 1957 bungalow that my wife and family and I live in, probably valued around $700,000 today.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We bought it 27 years ago for $145,000. That's insane. Yeah, nobody can afford that. Nobody can afford that.
A young man, 20, married, can't go get his own house.
No.
And wages, and people say, well, we want wages to go up with inflation. How mediocre. How about you prosper? How about the government stop stealing money from you at a 50? We pay 60% tax. You add in all the other nonsense. It just never ends. GST, that was supposed to be 3 years. And people say, well, I want my pension because it was promised to me. Promised to you by who? The person who promised it to you is dead. Okay? Let's cut the crap. You're believing a person who's going to be gone in 4 years or 8 at best. You think Trudeau's going to think about you when he's booted out of this country? Because I don't think he's going to be able to show his face anywhere. His father, they called it the garbage express. They threw so much garbage at his train. His dad was a loser who gave away our bank. We were debt-free until that loser. We threw him out of the country, right? He's dead and gone. Who thinks about that idiot? And then we bring his stupid son in.
Well, and I think, you're asking where does it go from here? Let's assume that we don't get everything we might dream of. I want to take a step back and say, who are we? Where did we come from? What's the truth about history? How much have we been lied to? What is recorded? I mean, you want to talk about fascinating rabbit holes. And how is that applicable to where we're going? Because first of all, we don't even know the truth about the world that we live in, our real history. The old world, all these buildings that they say that were built in a year, and they all had caught fire, all this nonsense. What did the world look like before? Where is it going? What could it look like? And are we getting in the way of, let's say, some Christian values? Because I really, not just personally adhere to this sort of worldview and spiritual life, but I really admire and like the work of Andrew Torba, the founder of Gab, and I know that there's a lot of people throughout the U.S. I like the comedian Owen Benjamin and his work. His Bear Terrier there in Ozarks, and however cultish that may seem to some people, there's a lot of. I think what you're asking also is pointing to the strength that has already been. When I say freedom's on the march, I think that this has been going on now for decades, where Luke and I were, waking up, writing stories, trying to tell people. Everybody was waking up. The internet has woken this third revolution information, this Aquarian age. The truth is coming out so furiously. Most people are left with this exact same question that we're talking about all day was, well, what can I do about it? What's the truth of the world? I don't know. What does freedom look like? I think I know. Okay, so what do I do about that? And I think that the quick answer for everybody is, well, I better get strong myself. I better, let's rely less on the government food. Let's rely less on the government, whatever it is, programs and health and all this kind of stuff. Let's try and become a little bit more independent, a little bit more self-sufficient. Obviously, again, what is the opposite of centralization but localization? So, there's a lot of local movements around the world in terms of building strength where we are. But back to your original point there, beyond my family, how can we motivate one another to join forces, not just in a very localized way, but, again, back to the Greater Reset. They're talking right now at the Greater Reset all about parallel economies and how important the word agorism is. And the founder back in the 60s of these ideas out of the libertarian side of the political spectrum, I think he was in his early 20s as sort of 1960s, early 60s were rolling around, and he coined that term agorism, leaning back into the power of the agora. But it's this parallel economy, parallel everything. We don't have to wait for permission. We don't have to ask anybody. We just have to stand up together, you and I, and say, you know what? How about we make a trade? We're going to start using this as our currency. We could make something up. It doesn't matter. Fiat currencies, currency replacement, parallel economies, and action on all fronts. From health and food is obviously the first, because people tend to starve, and it's one of the first places that we see people pushing back. I love that. But you can trace that back to the original organic push being predominant in sort of this freedom movement over the last 40, 50 years. So there's lots of steps that we take individually. There's lots of steps we take collectively and locally, but I think we have to take it to the next natural step, which is joining hands globally and starting to vote a little more furiously in all of the known time-honored ways that we're discussing, from education on down the line. Educating the next generation, standing firm, going to these events together, not caring, let's just build something new. They can't stop us. For real freedom is uncensorable, unstoppable, and unchains our real potential. It is literally unstoppable. And we just have to agree on a couple of early steps, which, as we've been saying all day, I don't think there's a lot of disagreement in this room.
And there shouldn't be a farmer in Alberta who wouldn't want this. Think about it. No property tax. You know how many farmers have to chop up their, when the principal dies, they got to sell it off to pay the tax, and they keep getting hacked to the point where only big, huge conglomerates can afford to run a farm. That's not the way it should be. So if there's no property tax, every farmer, they could think about it. You could pass the land on. There's no 3% tax when you transfer the land. Only when money changes hand is that 3%. So if people want to transfer their land to their children, generational wealth, the things that you could do. Because what are we here? But you have kids, so you know this. Everything we're doing is for them, because we're not taking it with us. But what can we leave them if the government just keeps hacking at it? For what? To give it to Ukraine? And I mean, just look up at how much money Canada and every other country gives outside of Canada for nonsense.
Gentlemen, I'm going to be honest. When I invited you for this interview, I really did not expect that we were going to have this deep of a conversation, that we'd be sharing so many thought-provoking ideas, and they are. I think everything you've said is something that every Canadian should be thinking about, whether they agree with you or not. They should at least be thinking about it, because you've clearly thought about it. You've thought about it a great deal. And so because you have, my final question for both of you, and Luke, I'm going to give you the last word. Chris, I'm going to let you go first. If you had 3 minutes to address all of Canada, every single Canadian out there, what would you say to them?
Boy. Well, I think first, I would like to call on the artist that I think is in everybody. You know, there's lots of talk these days about the soullessness of art from a secular standpoint. And if you agree with any of the things that we've been talking about today, and you know and love people like me that are creative, or you're creative yourself, then I think it's our job first and foremost. This is one of my first calls out. I love to call the artists. It's our job to inspire, our job to breed beauty out of the chaos that they're laying at our feet. Everything that humans do is so divinely inspired and amazing, but they can quickly make a muck of it. But it's our job to fix it up. It's our house. And we need as artists to inspire. So that would be my first message to anybody with a creative bone in your body. Would you please stand up? Let's join some hands together. And from movies and music on down the line, we need to give people a roadmap and flags to gather around. You know, I'm just the wordsmith. So from new borders and new possibilities to freedom's natural next steps, there's a lot of, hashtags, these kinds of things that we can think about rallying around. But art has the ability to inspire us at every level. Look at Richmond and that song, that I shared, I think, with 21 people, I think, the first day I heard that one. These are the things that are going to change the world, actually, also. And so I think that as artists, as Canadians, that's step one. Number two, I would say that fear and love, as we know, are the two choices that we have in every moment. We can also extrapolate that down to the Cain and Abel paragraph. Some moments, Cain wins in and of ourselves, and other moments it's the more able side of the equation. And I think we have to call ourselves to account and call one another to account. So I think shame has a righteous place, and I've been saying it for years, well before COVID. I've had it up to here. And if you, like me, have had it up to here, it's time we change the diatribe on the street. Canadians, I'm sick and tired of being so nice and understanding. I know the truth of it as Canadians. That's all false garbage anyways, because they'll just turn around behind your back and say a bunch of nonsense. You want to be really nice? You want to be really kind? You want to be really Canadian? Why don't you speak some truth? Let's do that together. Let's do it on the street, because I'm tired of lying to the kids, and that's who's really suffering. You want to look on the surface at all these problems, transgender and education and nonsense propaganda? Listen, the solution to that is truth. It comes out of your voice, yours and mine, on the street. And when we hear each other speaking truth in the face of tyranny, that's going to make a change, especially in the hearts of those with too much fear, because they're going to see our strength. They're going to see our conviction. They're going to see our righteous, holy pride, the divine possibility in us all in every moment, and they will want a piece of it too. If you want to love your neighbor and love your enemy, then let's show them a better path. And it starts by speaking truth, walking it. You gotta, on the street, because that's the biggest room for growth I see in Canada these days. Awful lot of people too scared to upset one another and themselves. And maybe that's the more disagreeable leaders that need to, but I think there's enough of us leading the charge there. The masses need to come up and rally around some of these key points.
Luke?
Well, it should be self-evident to anybody in Canada that the way things are going, they can't keep going. You know what I mean? If you're retired and you're getting your pension check and you got your RSPs and you're just hoping, you're just going to tread water and just hope you make it. Okay, but what about the other generation, like Chris talked about? They're not treading water now. So there's no future. If there's no future for the kids, there's no future for any country. So you can't put your head in the sand and say, well, it's not that bad. It's as bad as it ever has been. This is horrendous. So a change has to be made, and a minor change isn't going to do it. It's not going to stop what's coming. The World Economic Forum has an agenda, and I gotta say, how many politicians in Canada are all in? There should be none. We should care about, your family is here. If you're a politician here, your family's here. You should care about their future. But none of them are acting like they do. So something's got to change, and drastically change, like I said. So you got to think of not yourself, but the future. But anybody in Canada who has an RSP, has money in the bank, right, wants to retire, think about it. In our world, that money's yours. There's no tax on it. It's yours. It's gone. RSP is a trap, because are you going to pay more in taxes today or in the future? So storing it for the future to pay the tax then, you're screwing yourself. It's a scam. But in what we're proposing, it's yours. Your land's yours. Your house is yours. Your money's yours to do with as you want. That instantly will help the next generation. And if they have hope and happiness and the ability to have a family and a house that's reasonable, they're going to make a better life. But people running around and collecting welfare, they're not contributing. Like you said, I'm sorry, you could be offended all you want. You're not contributing anything to anybody. You're existing. That's not what it's meant to be on this earth. Existing isn't going to get you anywhere. And it's just, we're here because of something. Something got us to this point. Freedom-minded people didn't get us here. You could argue we allowed it to get here. So I'm just hoping for something better, and I'm hoping that anybody listening to this would see the value in it, because I don't see any downside to it. I really don't.
Luke, Chris, you are the founders of the United Freedom Party, a new provincial party in Alberta. You've also written a book. Where can our viewers go for more information on both the book and the party?
They can go to freedomisaparty.com. That's the website. And it should be a party. It shouldn't be scary. So we did a play on words. So freedomisaparty.com, and the book is available on Amazon, the Freedom Handbook. It's recognizable. Our names, Luke, Denis, Chris Hampton. You can find the book. It's an interesting read for anybody who wants to see a synopsis about, well, because we put a lot of thought into it, like the justice system, for instance, and protecting our rights. That's all it should be for. Nobody should be allowed to violate it. So that's just one of the aspects. In education, Chris, we wrote that chapter. It's simple. The solutions are really actually simple.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming in today. And I have to say personally, for providing me with one of the most stimulating interviews I've had the pleasure to conduct in some time. And I wish you all the best. I really do. While I myself on this show do not discuss my own personal politics, I love your ideas. And I sure hope people pay attention to them.
Thanks. Can I say one word
Absolutely,
on our book in closing? And
yes.
Again, I want to encourage people to go to the website for the Freedom Party, which is, as Luke said, freedomisaparty.com. A lot of fun. You can send us messages there if you want to get in touch. That's probably the best way to get in touch with Luke and I. The book is, as Luke was saying, is available on Amazon. I just want to draw people's attention. Yeah, we speak about everything from, the war on drugs and war to financial systems and medical systems and so on. But, my two favorite chapters are the one on education, because that's what woke me up as a child, in large part. And then, and of course, the long-term potentials we've been discussing and the need for that as sort of a step one always. But the second favorite chapter in the book is entitled A Whole World's Dark Night of the Soul. In terms of a last message again, and we think about, as Canadians and global citizens these days, it's scary to learn the truth about who's doing what, why, where, when to us. And maybe we don't even subscribe to their belief systems, but they believe it. These Satanists baby eating who knows what. So, yeah, it's frustrating. And we see society now in this age of Aquarius, this age of information coming out in the truth and so on. Everybody's suffering through that dark night of the soul at varying levels and degrees until we come firing out the other end like Luke and I so many years ago, wondering what to do next, But I think that that's one of the opportunities that we can really grow in our solidarity together most fiercely and effectively, is by recognizing that it is pretty challenging to have our worldview shook to its core and be left with near nothing. But however, it's also not inspiring and indicative of the true limitless opportunity and the scope of a human potential unleashing, which we can barely even, as the most hopeful and aware, scratch the surface of the possibility. Like Luke is saying, you free the free market that's always been choked to death. And boy, what could we really do you know? And so in the same token, as we see each other and we're shaming each other in the streets, it's this big call up, as we start to, there's a love, you know, for each other, that and an understanding of this struggle, that we say, look, I know it's tough, but look, you know, from the shape of the planet that we're on to whatever, we've been lied to about everything under the sun. Every word out of the official mouth is lies. Maybe a kernel of truth in there somewhere. So when we get to that point, it's initially a little bit scary, but I want to remind people about the real hope, opportunity, and truth coming on the other side of that. And, you know, suffering lessens when we join together, because, you know, and our potential grows. So I just want to remind people to look to the book for a little bit of solace there. There's a lot of prescience. There's a lot of information for people who want to wake up in varying levels. And there's a lot of really high level, sophisticated tools for us freedom fighters to carry the torch a little further down the road more effectively.
Luke, any final comments to add?
No. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.